All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Tilley. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Plano Police Department. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. I want to start off by making some introductions. To my immediate right is Plano Police Chief Gregory W. Rushin. Next is Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis. Next to him is Collin County First Assistant Bill Werski. To his right is Assistant Chief Brad Fortune, and then to his immediate right is Assistant Chief Dan Curtis. Also in the back we have Deputy City Manager Mark Israelson here joining us as well. Just to lay down some ground rules, there's some new information that we do have. Please understand that this is an ongoing investigation. There is a lot of information that we're just not able to share at this moment. Hopefully in the future we'll have more information for you. Chief Rushin will cover some of that stuff, but again, just please be respectful and understand that this is a major investigation that's being conducted by our detectives as well as the Texas Rangers investigation. So with that said, I will turn it over now to Chief Gregory W. Rushin.
Good afternoon. I'm here today to discuss the mass casualty shooting that occurred in Plano last night. Please keep in mind, as was mentioned, this is still very fresh and a very active investigation. We're still out there at the scene, processing the scene. We have witnesses still to interview, so we don't want certain information released that could impact those interviews. Also, the next of kin are still being notified, and of course we're going to give them ample opportunity to then notify their loved ones when they are notified. So we have to be sensitive to that as well. Let's start from the beginning. Yesterday, September 10th, 2017, at about 8 p.m. we received calls from citizens of multiple shots fired at a single-family residence in the 1700 block of West Spring Creek Parkway in Plano. Our first officer arrived in just over 2 minutes after the call was dispatched. He approached from the rear of the residence. He heard gunshots inside the residence. He observed shooting victims down in the backyard, quickly understood exactly what was occurring. He immediately engaged the armed suspect who was inside the residence and shot and killed the suspect to stop the shooting. Responding officers immediately gave life-saving measures, CPR for victims until a fire rescue arrived to take over those tasks. There were a total of 9 gunshot victims discovered at the residence. 7 of these were deceased and 2 were transported to the hospital. One of the 2 transported to the hospital later was also pronounced deceased, bringing the victims total to 8 deceased. All victims were adults. The crime scene was confined to the property, and this is an isolated incident. The suspect had ties to that residence, and we are not looking for any other suspects in this matter. The case is being investigated, as Officer Tilley said, by the Plano Police Department with the Texas Rangers, who are doing the officer shooting investigation portion of that. This is a practice that's become common around the country where agencies do not work their own police shootings. This is the second such shooting we've had where they've worked our officer-involved shooting. The Texas Rangers are highly skilled investigators in the investigative branch of the Texas Department of Public Safety. The Plano Police Department is also conducting its own administrative investigation through our professional standards unit. The officer has been placed on administrative leave with pay pending the investigation. And of course, this is standard policy we do in all of our investigations, as other departments do as well. I would ask everyone here today to keep the family members and loved ones of the shooting victims in your thoughts and prayers. This is a very difficult time for them, for the first responders, and for our entire community. We'll continue to release information as it becomes available, as it will not impact the investigation. With that, we'll take a few questions.
Chief, how is your one living victim doing in hospitals that you know?
I don't have a status on the victim. David, do you have a status?
I do not, sir.
Chief, was there some indication that there was a previous call down the street of the location that was tied to this case? Can you explain that if you have those details?
I don't know that we've established and figured that out yet. David, do you know any more about that?
No, that's still being looked at, and that's part of what was reported to us, but at this point we're still looking at it as is there a connection or not.
So if you don't have clarity on that, then was this from, well, I'll let you explain, what was it on the call? Was it a domestic dispute call initially, or just gunshots fired? Explain it.
Well, we know that the shooter was related to that property, or had been related to that property. I don't know what else I can tell you about that, other than he was known by people in the residence.
Chief, have you had calls to that address for domestic issues? Had policemen called 911 previously?
I'm not aware of that, David.
I'm not aware of any calls there either.
Chief, did the suspect return fire?
We don't know that right now. We're still interviewing the officer and other witnesses.
Your guys able to ascertain why there was such a number of people in that home at the time? What was happening?
My understanding is they were having a cookout that afternoon, and they were getting prepared to watch the Cowboy football game. It was a party at the residence.
This kind of activity can happen at public venues, but how alarming to be at a friend's house. It's not what you expect when you're together with friends, Chief.
Well, anytime you have a homicide, it's very disturbing, and certainly when you have this many. We've never seen anything like this in our city before. Many times you do see family violence type situations that do occur in communities across the country, and those can become very volatile very quickly.
What were the ages of the victims, you know?
All I know that they were all adults.
Is there a breakdown by
They were in their 20s and 30s is what I was told.
breakdown by gender, sir?
I do not know. I knew that both genders were victims.
Have you
That's
been
all I
able
know.
to positively ID everyone, or just, yeah, have you been able to positively ID everyone?
The last I heard, they were not able to yet. They were working on that to make sure that they have all positive IDs before they can make the notifications to the next of kin. And then you want to have enough time for the next of kin to make notifications to their other loved ones as well. So that's part of the process we're going through right now.
Are you able to identify your shooter positively for us today?
I am not at this time.
Has the firearm been recovered?
Hopefully shortly though, Sean.
Has the firearm been recovered, and if so, what is it?
I was told that there are multiple firearms, and that's all I know at this time. Multiple firearms, and they were of different types. But I don't know. I think they're still trying to figure that out at the scene.
I'd like for you to talk about the bravery of your officer in the moment. He has victims down, he hears gunfire, he didn't wait for backup, he didn't retreat and hold position and call SWAT. He went to the threat.
Well, you know, law enforcement across the country are trained in active shooters. When somebody is actively taking people's lives, and we know that we have to get in there immediately as quickly as possible. We train to wait for a partner and go in two at a time. When something like this occurs, you know, you can't wait. You have to go into seconds matter. And this officer went directly into fire where fire was taking place, and stopped the shooter's ability to continue to kill people. I think that the officer showed great bravery, and this is the kind of thing that we see every day in law enforcement.
Do you have an accurate number of the number of attendees at this party?
I do not.
Was it, do you know it to be dozens, sir? Over 20?
I don't know a number, sir. I just know, I can tell you about the people that received gunshot wounds.
So there were there others present who were not wounded or fatally, mortally wounded?
Well, we're not able to discuss that right now because we are trying to conduct all these interviews at this time. That'll be something I'll give you the next time I talk to you.
We've heard that there was a knife involved. Do you know if any of the victims sustained knife wounds, or were they all gunshot wounds?
That's the first I've heard of that. I've not heard anything about a knife being involved.
I haven't heard any.
No, just firearms.
Chief. Previous threats to anyone in that home?
I haven't had any chance to look at any history, premise history, or anything like that, and research it. Y'all got to understand that this is still very early in this investigation. This was late last night when everybody arrived and started working through the night. There's so much to do when you have, you know, this many victims in this type of incident. So we're still shy of details. I apologize for that, but we'll be looking into all of that as part of the investigation.
Chief, I just wanted to go back and make sure I have some clarity on the initial call is gunshots, but you all understand it to be some kind of interpersonal relationship with people who live in the house together. That's where it's a little confusing for me.
Well, the officers were simply notified it was a weapons call when they responded. That's what they knew. And they responded to that, and they knew that they reported that shots were fired. So when the officer got there, of course, he approached from the rear of the residence, and the first thing he heard was shots being fired. He saw people in the backyard down that were shot. so he instantly knew what was going on. He went into the house on his own, made that decision that he couldn't wait for a backup for another partner to go in as we were trained, and go in to stop the shooting. And that's exactly what he did. He actually found the shooter inside and ended his shooting spree.
And since then, your investigators, your detectives have ascertained there's some kind of relationship between the shooter. That's where I'm trying to get a better understanding of that.
Yes, sir. He had a relationship with that house. They knew who he was. It wasn't a stranger on stranger crime, is what I'm saying.
But any idea how long he had been in that house?
I don't know that
We had
answer.
heard reports that he may have barged into this party, was not invited to the party. Can you comment any further on that?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to answer, but I don't know.
Chief, is this investigation more complicated because so many of your eyewitnesses did not survive this, or are you able to get information from those that may have?
Well, when you work an investigation, you talk to everyone that you can. It's not always just people on site, it's people around the neighborhood. Like you've already been asking questions about backgrounds of the shooting suspect, etc. So we do the same things that you would do, in a way that you do investigations similar to what we do, so you get an idea of how we do those.
Chief, is there any indication that something had occurred at a different location before what happened at this home?
That was asked earlier.
Oh, sorry.
And that's something that I'm not sure of to be able to answer, provide you a response that's accurate. I've heard conflicting information about that, and I still haven't been able to sort that out. I don't know if they have yet, but I don't have that information to provide you. Do you have that information?
We're still trying to confirm that or go into it a little further, but there's been nothing confirmed yet.
We have heard the same information you've heard, and I know our detectives are looking at that currently.
Chief, I know you mentioned there were no 911 calls. Did someone ask about just general calls for service at the address? Did that happen?
I'm not aware of any calls that we've not done a premise history check, to my knowledge. They certainly will do that, and that'll be part of the investigation, but I don't know that we've done that yet. You got to realize right now they're focusing on the scene, the crime scene, and that's a large crime scene. It takes a lot of people and a long time to work. And then those periphery investigative leads we work probably after the fact, or maybe in conjunction with that life. We got people still here. Keep in mind that we've had people working in Houston. We've got people down at the mega shelter in Dallas. We're pretty stretched thin and using all of our resources as best we can on this investigation, as well as all the other important things that we're doing as well as the organization.
Chief, we've spoken with a number of people and other reporters as well who identified both of these individuals as estranged, as husband and wife. What I'm asking you is that based on your investigation at this point, the person who killed these people, you've not been able to contact their next of kin so you can release that name to the public?
I don't know which next of kin have been notified and which have
The
not.
shooter.
I don't know which ones have been notified and which are not. I know we had some in this exact room earlier today trying to figure out if their loved ones were the ones that were involved in this incident, were victims. So I'm not clear on who's been notified and who has not been notified. As soon as we get that and we can notify you, we will let you know the names of the shooters, what you're looking for, I guess.
Do you know how many 911 calls you received related to shots fired? I had one person who said they called and they couldn't get through because it was busy or no one was answering.
Generally, I don't think 911 is busy, but I don't know how many calls we had, but there were more than a couple.
Do we know if the shooter was under the influence of anything?
Oh, we wouldn't know that at this point. We wouldn't have any way to know that I'm aware of, yeah.
Have you been able, sir, to determine how many gunshots there were inside that home as you gathered evidence to this point, or can you tell us how much you found so far?
I don't believe that we would know that at this point. You realize the number of victims, and you can imagine the number of gunshots. That takes a long time to sort that out. When we go to crime scenes, we have to determine trajectory, try to locate the rounds. It's a quite long, enduring process to go through that, and that's going to take some time.
From your interview with your surviving witness, was there anyone in the home who returned the fire when they were being fired on?
I don't know of the results of any interviews of witnesses, and we interview anybody who could potentially provide information, but I don't know of any results of any of those. In fact, they told me they're still conducting those interviews. That's why we're kind of being cautious with some of the information. We don't want to influence anybody's statement, something they may hear in the media.
Chief, can you speak to the location of these victims in the home? Was it centrally located inside the home? Or?
I don't know the exact location. I do know that there were some victims in the backyard and some in the house, but it was contained to that property.
And I apologize, Chief, you may have mentioned this before, to you all's knowledge in your investigation, this perpetrator, just one weapon with him or multiple?
Multiple weapons, not of the same type. I can't tell you the exact weaponry, but I can tell you that.
But firearms, multiple?
Firearms,
Okay.
multiple firearms of different types.
Was he carrying them legally? Did he have a permit for it?
We don't know that yet.
So is it safe to say he went there on a mission to do exactly what he was going to do? There was not something that was, do we know if it was premeditated, if he's carrying all those weapons with him?
Well, you know, I don't know that. You know, the suspect is deceased. You know, we can make a judgment on that when an individual shows up at a party with numerous weapons and commits mass murder. You can do that just like I can.
Chief, I know every situation is different. Do you know what told your officer to enter from the rear of the home as opposed to the front?
No, I do not know that. I haven't talked to the officer other than to speak very briefly and give him some words of encouragement after the shooting when I was at the scene, but I haven't had a chance to interview him or talk to him about the scene. He actually, our officers, when they are involved in shootings, they have legal counsel, and we work through their legal counsel in the interview process.
Quick clarification. Have any of the interviews taken place with anybody who was in the home when this incident started, or have the interviews that are ongoing been people outside of the home, neighbors?
Once again, you know, I don't micromanage these investigations. I'm not there all the time, and they're going in a lot of different directions. I don't know who they've interviewed and who they haven't interviewed. I don't know all the leads that they've interviewed. I apologize, but I don't know that right now. And it's going to take probably some time to get that together. I would probably venture that there's very few people out there, maybe one or two, that will even begin to know all the people that they're interviewing, because generally you'll make assignments and they'll do different things, and they may interview several people before they report back. So it's still ongoing, it's still fluid, like I mentioned earlier. So it's very fresh.
I'm not good with numbers. I want to make sure I'm right, Chief, so forgive me for being ignorant. We have 7 plus the shooter, or 8 plus the shooter? Total of 8 victims, including the shooter, or 9?
We had 7 at the scene that were deceased, victims, plus the shooter was